Only 1 in 4 believe Hamas committed murder and rape in Israel on October 7th. 52% want it to be illegal to show a picture of Muhammad. 28% say it would be undesirable to outlaw homosexuality. So to me, like, these views are extreme.
That's not the right question. The right question is this. Did Hamas transact a war, a conflict, defensively in alignment with Islamic principles? And the answer is no.
Why do I have to ask it from a principle of Islam? Asking if murder or occurred to me is very direct. Even if they say no because their reasoning is, oh, well, it's part of a war, that's still a big problem. You know, there's very few Westerners that would say it's okay to people as part of a conflict. I was going to just read you out a bit of, you know, sentiments from British Muslims to kind of highlight some of the concerns that are going on. Because I guess the argument most people give us is, well, most Muslims are moderate in the UK. So, you know, the people you're talking about are only a small minority. But, you know, last year, the Henry Jackson Society released a report where they polled British Muslims. And this is some of the examples of, you know, the sentiments we're seeing right now. So about half of British Muslims say Jews have too much power in the UK. 44% find the removal of an MP on the wrong side of Israel and Palestine to be acceptable. Only 1 in 4 believe Hamas committed murder and rape in Israel on October 7th. 53% of 18 to 34-year-old Muslims are more likely to sympathize with Hamas. 52% want it to be illegal to show a picture of Muhammad. 16% say it would be undesirable to have a Muslim political party, so the majority want it. 23% say it would be undesirable to have Sharia law. 23% say it would be undesirable to have Islam as declared the national religion, and 28% say it would be undesirable to outlaw homosexuality. So to me, like, these views are extreme. You know what I mean? And it's a scary right. percentage what we're seeing.
Well, so this is what I mean about contextualizing questions, contextualizing something so it works within an Islamic construct. Okay. So let's go back to that first Hamas comment that you made. This is an example. This is a really, really great example of how they asked the wrong question. So what was the comment? About Hamas?
So I think I said two. So one of them was only 1 in 4 believe Hamas committed murder and rape in Israel on October 7th.
Right. So that's not the right question. The right question is this. Did Hamas transact a war, a conflict, defensively in alignment with Islamic principles? And the answer is no.
But why do we have to ask it like that? So if it's coming from a secular, you know, if I'm polling a Muslim person and I say, do you believe they committed murder and rape? And they say no. I mean, why do I have to ask it from a principle of Islam?
Well, because then it becomes this ambiguous interpretive element, right? So do I believe that they converted? Do I believe they transacted murder and rape? No, because they're fighting a war to defend, you know, the oppressed. So it's too interpretive. It's like that sign that says no antisocial behavior.
I really struggle to understand how that. I mean, asking.
I googled the Henry Jackson Society to figure out who they were.
Asking if.
So I was just
asking if murder or rape occurred to me is very direct, and also, I mean, even if they say no because their reasoning is, oh, well, it's part of a war, that's still a big problem. You know, there's very few Westerners that would say it's okay to rape people as part of a conflict. You know, so it's still.
But here's the thing. So how should war be transacted in Islam? There's avoid injuring of non-combatants, right? Were non-combatants injured? Yes. So they violated that. That's a maxim. They should need to treat prisoners of war humanely. Did they do that? That's probably most. I would say no. All right. Use force after peace talks have failed. Right. Not fighting to gain money, land, or power.
I guess what I'm struggling to understand is, you know,
destroying civilians' property. hurting women and children. I mean, so the reason why I'm saying this is that, and this is my business, right? My business is speaking in the same terminology of my community. Then all of a sudden, now you're invoking faith. And so you're saying, I'm coming from a secular perspective. Well, it's a Muslim, the Muslims are Muslims. It's not something that they opt in and opt out in like a Western construct. It's who you are, right? And it's something that governs your entire life every minute. So if you're not speaking in those terms, you're actually speaking you're in another
But
area. But
isn't this the
Hamas,
issue? Because if they want to live in Britain, then we should not have to modify the way we ask questions just so that they realize rape is wrong. Like, as in, to what you're saying to me sounds like a stretch
no,
because
well, we're talking about war and
okay,
Hamas. So we're talking
but
about
as
war
in
and
that was
Hamas.
just one example. But if you ask them, should homosexuality be criminalized? Only 28% say no. So to me, it's like, well, I don't need to placate these people by trying to phrase it in some way that's in line with Islam. Like, it's pretty clear that they want my existence to be illegal, and I don't see any gray area there. I don't understand.
Well, rape is illegal in the UK, right? So it's enforceable, right? When it comes to the questions you were asking, so I don't want to conflate everything. You're talking about the questions that you were asked to Muslims. The reason why you got the answers you got is because they weren't asking them in the right way. Now, do you need to modify and ask questions the right way to get the answer you're looking for? The questions that were being asked, everybody pines over, am I asking the question correctly? I mean, Jordan Peterson always says, let me think about that. And he always says, maybe it'll be better if you ask the question this way, and he's always trying to figure out how to be precise. So my business is being precise in Islam, right? So Hamas transacted a war illegally in accordance with the Quran. They're on the other side of Islam. They're a doomsday cult. So for a Muslim to say, no, I think they transacted that war justly, then do they know what they're talking about in Islam? And the only thing that holds Muslims accountable is Islam. All right. So now if you go to another country like the UK or America, Islamic law is always subordinate to the law of the land. So that's something that's in Islam. So they have to adhere to the laws within that country, and that's your argument, right? So you don't have to modify anything. They should be in adherence to the law of the land because Islamic law, unless you're a theocracy, Islamic law is always subordinate to the law of the land. Okay, that's how it works. It's in every book of Islamic
So
law. That's how it works.
how would you ask the
Now,
question about homosexuality in the right way then? I mean, doesn't I don't want to go back into kind of the real technicalities of the Quran and everything, but from my understanding, it does condemn
so
being homosexual.
so it, anybody of any lifestyle is protected under Islam under dignity, and so that's the problem. And you cannot take life. There's no opinion in Islam when it comes to dignity of human person, and it's very explicit on how to protect dignity. Like, okay, my daughter's a good example. Okay, so she came out when she was 13 and said she was gay. And so my response was very like, I said, well, have you worked with the equipment? And she said, no. And I go, well, work with the equipment first and you'll know real fast how gay you are. Right. So that's how it kind of, and so, and she's now 19.
So do you, just a side
so
question. So do you, like, are you okay with then sex before marriage or whatever?
Listen, sex before, well, it's an interesting way to ask the question. Am I okay with sex? So when it comes to sex, everyone has to govern themselves. I try. I'm not a great Muslim. I try to be a good Muslim. I don't know how good I am in the pantheon of being judged, but the fact is that sex before marriage is haram, is sin, right? That Does that mean that you ban it? It's not banned. People have sex all the time, in marriage, out of marriage, and before marriage. The challenge is that the sin is on. I can advise someone to not do it in using pastoral care, right? And I can say this is not the right way because it causes complications. This is what I advise to do, but it's on them to transact whatever activities they want to transact, right? And then in doing so, they take on that sin, right? But Allah is mercy. That's the thing. In Islam, Allah, in Christianity, God's love. In Islam, God is mercy. He has 100 names, but mercy is the biggest thing. Everyone has access to Jannah, the garden, right? To heaven. And so we all rely on God's mercy because he's like a supreme being, right? And so we all hope that we make the world a better place, we transact good works, and we adhere to the law as much as best as we can. So sex out of marriage, it's not good in Islam. An imam would say it's not permissible. People do it all the time. So there's actually a way in which to transact goodwill to get out from under maybe having sex under before you got married, or sex outside of marriage. When it comes to something with specificity, like you're saying homosexuality, I don't know any Muslim that does that. If they don't look at homosexuality from a dignity perspective, that everyone deserves dignity, and it's not because you're granting it to them, it's because God, right? Allah has made all of us viceroys on this planet. Those individuals have dignity, and it's your job, even if they're under siege, to take them under, to protect them. And Islam, generally, 98% of the Quran is how to live, and it's to extend protections against the vulnerable. So anybody who's not doing that is really violating
And
the laws.
do you think
So I don't know how,
like these percentages, do you think people have a right, does it make sense that people are very concerned by that?
I'm very concerned by the, I'm concerned by the answers. I also would say there's a better way to ask the question to a Muslim that anchors it in what they know or should know, and then also puts the consequence on their shoulder. So if you turn around and you say, war is transacted this way, right? And you say, are you aware of this part of the Quran, right? And then you say, did they transact war? They'll say, well, it wasn't war. Well, it is. You're not supposed to kill civilians, no women and children. You're not supposed to destroy property. You're supposed to field an army, essentially, and then tangle with another army. That's generally how it's supposed to happen. So anybody who's waging war and not waging it in a just manner, with it, in adherence to the explicit rules, then that's a problem. And so Muslims are generally operate with their hands, at least one hand tied behind their back, because of what is explicit in the Quran. Anyone who's not, and there's a reason for that. There's a reason, because our path is supposed to be harder. We're supposed to be pious, to use a Western term, right? We're supposed to be not just the fundamentals of Islam means that we are supposed to be extending hospitality, even if it's something we don't agree with. And so what you're dealing with in the UK, and what terrorism sort of transacts around the world, is we're going to empower people that are disenfranchised, and then we're going to empower them with cherry picking from the Quran, and then pull out certain things that are, examples of, like, a lot of the stuff where it talks about the infidel. I hear a lot of, I have a Christian friend of mine who was talking about, well, it says that this is the infidel. I go, read before and read after, and you're going to find out that that's a story, all right, to describe a situation and a speech that was said to motivate people. It's like, we're gonna huddle down, we're gonna bunker in, and then we're gonna transact violence against the infidel if he attacks us, right? But only if he attacks us, right? So that's what these say. So, but then it says this is how you transact war. And so the problem is, if you're gonna transact a just war, then you can't be sneaking through a wall and with paragliders and then murdering people in their homes. The second you do that, you violate a maxim of Islam. And guess what? You might claim to be Muslim, but you've just your Muslim membership card has just been extracted by Gabriel. Now, does that Does that help anybody who was murdered that day? Probably not. But or someone that was captured or someone's house that was burned. But the problem is that people want to take the shortcut, and then they want to turn around and say, ask if you have questions like this that you were showing me. I just, like I said, I googled this the Henry Jackson incident, and I was like, oh my God, I'm like, what's going on here? The problem is that no one within the Muslim community, I shouldn't say no one, but it's a struggle to no one is saying what I'm saying openly and just with
Right.
straight lines. And I don't get it, because we all sit amongst each other and we'll say this to each other, but then they don't want to, and it's up to them whether they want to go in and transact a conversation like this openly where it's recorded, and then hopefully not have somebody waiting outside with an AK-47, right? So, and I just don't care about any of that, right? So I don't have family overseas. I'm a fourth generation African American, so I don't have family that's out somewhere that's going to be. So I think the challenge is that I think the questions, maybe there's a better way of saying it, the questions that were asked are valid, but if you want to hold people accountable within the Islamic construct, then you have to ask questions that are culturally and religiously and theologically astute
But should they
to the
not
faith.
should they not
And
be
so,
able to should they not be good enough at, hearing a question and then putting it through the lens of their faith themselves?
well, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. There's an accountability element. Like, they should already be walking into the conversation. What the answers that you're getting on a positive note are the individuals that are sympathetic towards the Palestinian people and the struggle of the Palestinian people. And I, like everybody is sympathetic towards the Palestinian people, but I also believe that the Jewish community has a right to exist, and Israel has a right to self-determination. I mean, my views on Israel Palestine are somewhat controversial. I think that it was a colonial possession that was given to the Jewish community post World War II, and them's the breaks, right? That's just
Yeah.
the way it was. So, is it just? No, but that's just the way it is. So, the Ottomans lost. The real estate was owned by the British Empire and the French. The Sykes-Picot Treaty, as terrible as it was, um, um, was enacted, was ratified. T.E. Lawrence, who tried to start an Arab League, was unsuccessful, and may have been murdered by his own people. I don't know. I just talked with a British officer who said that he was trying to do something in the Brits with the Brits. I was like, is that true? But it's a colonial possession that real estate was given to the Jewish community to start a state. What's transacted after the state it's very simple. Everybody wants to go to the 48 borders, right? Well, here's the problem. The Arabs fought a war to expand their territory and lost. And they lost. So to want to go back to the borders before you lost the war, that's kind of ludicrous too. Um, you have to agree on a two-state solution. You've got all this business going on. That doesn't negate that two things can be read at the same time. What was transacted in Gaza over the last 2 years or 3 years is terrible. I mean, it turned Gaza into a parking lot. And here's the thing. I'm pretty sure that's what they did was against the Torah, which says that the land of Israel is given to the children of Abraham, which doesn't just mean the children of Jacob. It means the children of Ishmael as well, and those other sort of 6 or 7 off-branch kids too, whatever they turn into. I don't know. I can't remember their names. But the point is that you have to steward it. The Jewish community, they're held to a higher standard too, because they adhere to the same law essentially that Muslims do. So the problem is that there's a lot of sort of charming befuddlement happening with theology, and so if you want to hold a religious community accountable, there's secular laws for like general society, but then there's also another layer of religious laws that are very specific, and that community has to adhere to maintain their status within that community. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm not negating the secular element. I'm saying those questions, great. Those are great questions, great answers. But I would ask them
Right.
differently to a Muslim. I'd say, did Hamas transact the war in accordance with the
Mm.
rules of the Quran? Yes or no? And then we'd walk through them, and you can find very explicitly no women and children, no civilians. No, I mean, very easily you can see that they violated the core tenets of Islam. And so where does that leave them in Islam? My opinion is that they're on the other side of
Yeah.
Islam. An Ayatollah might say something different, or a sheikh might say something different. But it's this type of stuff that, when governing our own community, that concerns me rather than, and that doesn't mean I can't criticize Pierce Morgan for saying, for jumping out on his program about rape gangs, because I think it's terrible, and I think it's great to bring that spotlight on that. But in the same respect, it sounded to me as like, I'm really upset when non-UK people rape UK girls. That's what I came across to somebody like me, and I'm trying to worry about my own community. But it was really funny. I go, God, this guy, and so I understand he's a headline chaser, and that's what he does, and so it's like part of it is all hyperbole and what he. But the thing is like, no one's asking the right questions to the Muslim community. And so those people that became MPs that were voted in on Gaza, my question to them would be like, okay, if I was going to interview them, I'd say, so how should Muslims transact war? And so when Hamas threw all those rules out, where do they stand when it comes to Islamic culture and community and theology? And then if you're advocating for it, is something happening to Islam where we're just moving out of the rules now, and it's a salad bar? Because that's not what Islam is about. It's not a pick and choose thing. We all try to adhere to it in a thoughtful and appropriate manner. And like you're saying, you were asking about the gay community. Is like, how do Muslims view homosexuality? It's a struggle. It's a part of Islamic culture, right? A lot of guys get married and have kids, and then they're on Thursday, Friday night, they're going off and they have their boyfriends, but they got married and had kids because that's part of the mandate within Islam. But then they do their thing on the side, and a lot of wives know that, and it happens with women too. A lot of women are having families and everything else, and then they have their girlfriends. So we've got to be honest with what is going on in our culture, and honest what's going on in our faith. But in the same respect, there's also mechanisms that exist within our culture to allow for people to do things that they need to do, and that's who they are, and that comes from their heart. But it also, because it's a collective society, collective culture, and Islamic context, they also have to maintain something
Yeah.
within that theological construct. And so it's like see something, say something. That's not Islam. That's not Islam when it comes to homosexuality. It's more like don't ask, don't tell. It's
Right.
more like that. And I know that that's wrong from a freedom of expression sort of perspective, but freedom of expression was never a priority in Islam. So, like, for anyone, So, and that in itself is a problem, not just with homosexuality, but when it comes to like wearing jewelry. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. Wearing makeup. There's still controversy on what is acceptable and not acceptable, depending on which which school of jurisprudence or sect that you belong to.
Yeah.
Just worship. No two Muslims are the same. No two mosques are the same. I went into the mosque the other day, and this guy said, "You're not praying right." Well, I'm Shia, so I was doing with something called the Qunut, which is a prayer to Hazrat Ali, and he was saying, "You don't do that here." And because Sunnis don't do that, so he was, and so we got into a conversation about it, and I said, well, is this not a mosque, or are you saying it's something else? Are you saying this is your place? So we started getting into that conversation, and Sunnis pray with their hands like this with a cross, and Shia pray with their hands down. So right away they knew, and like it was like a gang. They all come up to me, and a lot of people were just curious. They're like, "What's going on here? Oh, you must be a new Muslim. You don't know what you're doing." And I was like, "No." And then they had their only perspective was Sunni Islam, so they had never seen a Shia. So it became a sort of intra-faith engagement, and I didn't even realize that was going to happen because I just assumed I could just go to Juma prayers and hang out. So I think that just like any culture, we have to figure out how to communicate with the other. So someone who's not Muslim, but there's a lot of controversy there's a lot of discussion within the Muslim community that's kind of needs to be sussed out, just like within the Christian community, right? There's Southern Baptists, there's Calvinists, there's Catholics, there's Antiochian Christians, and none of them are praying the same way or interacting the same way. Everybody goes to respective corners. But when you have this infusion of refugees, immigrants, whatever you want to call it, that are given a leg up because of the system that's in place, but also not being told the path to integrate, or have been saying there is no path to integrate. You guys could just be who you are, and then are protected without any rules. It's it's Thunderdome, and so that's the challenge. I think that more Muslims need to speak out. There's a lot of scholars out there that are much smarter than me, that know the Quran inside and out, know Islamic law, and we need to kind of convene the group and have our community talk about some of these issues. Muslims for Muslims is a good example. We try to assemble in the traditional Islamic styles or Greek jury style, Muslims debating on Islam in public, in a public space, and that's what Crossing Faiths is part of.
I think it's
and so
it's sort of unusual, at least in the UK. It would be very unusual to see a Muslim person doing something like that, bringing different ideas together and debating their own ideas. At least I think so.
Yeah, I mean, have you ever seen 4 Muslims sitting at a podium discussing Islam? That's the thing. And why? Because there's all this strange interplay happening behind the scenes. And like I said, there's a lot of the guys that get invited to speak on Islam. For example, Piers Morgan, when he pulls people in, these guys are yelling and screaming. And I go, like, how is this guy? They're not really they're there to defend Islam by being on the offensive. And I go, you're talking about burning of the Quran. Okay, we're against the burning of holy books in general, depiction of the prophet in general. Okay? But if a Muslim, it's not just a depiction of the prophet, Muhammad, peace be upon him. It's a depiction of every prophet. So if you're okay with Jesus being depicted, or Abraham, or any of these other guys, where are you on those issues? And notice the Muslim community is silent. And want to know why they're silent? Because they are empowered by the depiction of one of the prophets, but not the rest. And it's the same thing with these sort of rape gangs, right? So they're empowered, and yet they're ignoring the rest, and no one's calling them out. And maybe they don't know, but the fact is that it's our responsibility as Muslims to let people know. All right. So I listed parts of the surahs in the Quran. Someone can look them up. It will be in the show notes. And then it's up to them to then go to their imam and have their imam talk their way out of this, which is then going against the Quran.
And I mean, also,
right?
the police also did not fulfill their role. It was also up to the police to stop it. So.
Yeah. And Sadiq Khan, it's his city. Like, what the responsibility, he took a public office. All right. So in Islamic construct, he's like a monarch. He's like a king, right? So he needs to adhere now, enforce the law, and he then also needs to balance faith. And he's not doing that at all. He's choosing to ignore the maxims of Islam because to protect maybe his community. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't care. I don't know. But the fact is that he's transacting. He's allowing violence to be transacted against someone who should be protected. And he's allowing his community, cultural community, but his also faith community to do it. And so, where is this guy? And so why is he doing that? And I don't know. I can't answer for him. But all I do know is that he's transacting something that's against Islam.